David Letterman dropped his cue cards mid-sentence when Marlon Brando stood up from the guest chair without warning. Paul Schaefer's keyboard went silent. The studio audience froze, and for the next 90 seconds, America watched the most legendary actor in Hollywood do something no one had ever seen him do on television, something that would never be explained, never be repeated, and never make it into the official NBC archives. What happened that night in 1984 wasn't just television. It was a confession disguised as a walk-off. It was a Tuesday night in March 1984, and Late Night with David Letterman was operating at full power. The monologue had landed perfectly. Paul Schaefer's band was tight and energetic. The audience was warm and ready. Everything was running like clockwork in Studio 6A at 30 Rockefeller Plaza in New York City. David Letterman sat behind his wooden desk, 37 years old, curly brown hair perfectly messy in that calculated way, wearing a navy blue suit with a thin striped tie. He was in his element, sharp, quick, deflecting any hint of sincerity with sarcasm, like it was a survival reflex. The show had been on the air for 2 years now, and Letterman had found his rhythm. He wasn't Johnny Carson. He didn't want to be. He was the alternative, the guy who made fun of the format while still respecting it. The ironic host for a generation that didn't trust polish. "Our next guest," Letterman said, glancing at his cue cards with that signature half-smile, "is someone I'm genuinely nervous to talk to, and I don't say that often. He's won 2 Academy Awards. He's been in The Godfather, On the Waterfront, A Streetcar Named Desire, Apocalypse Now, and he once turned down an Oscar on live television and sent a Native American activist in his place. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Marlon Brando." The audience erupted into applause. Paul Schaefer hit a dramatic, sustained chord on the keyboard, and the band kicked in with a jazzy flourish. And from backstage, moving slowly, deliberately, Marlon Brando walked out. He was 60 years old now, significantly heavier than his Godfather days, wearing a dark turtleneck sweater and loose black slacks. His face was still striking those penetrating eyes, that legendary jawline, but there was something else present now. A weariness, a weight that wasn't just physical. He moved like someone carrying decades of something unspoken. Letterman stood up and extended his hand. Brando shook it firmly, then settled into the guest chair. He adjusted himself, crossed one leg over the other, and immediately looked uncomfortable under the hot studio lights. His eyes scanned the audience briefly, then fixed on Letterman with an intensity that was already making the host recalibrate. "Mr. Brando, thanks so much for being here," Letterman said, sitting back down and organizing his cards. Brando nodded slowly. "Call me Marlon." "Marlon. Okay, that feels weird to say." Letterman grinned at the audience. They laughed, releasing some tension. "You get used to it," Brando said flatly. No smile, no warmth, just presence. Letterman paused for just a fraction of a second. Already, something felt different. Brando wasn't playing the game. There was no charm offensive, no practiced anecdotes ready to deploy. Just this heavy, unfiltered presence. "So," Letterman said, recovering with a joke, "you don't do a lot of talk shows. I think the last time you did one was never, close to never," Brando said. "Why not?" Brando looked at him for a long moment before answering. "Because most of them are pointless." The audience laughed nervously. Letterman blinked, smiled, looked down at his cards. "Well," Letterman said, "I appreciate you making an exception for us. I think." Brando's mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but something. "You're different. You don't pretend as much as the others." Letterman didn't know what to do with that compliment, if it even was one. He shifted in his chair. "Let's talk about your career. You've been acting for over 30 years now. Do you still love it?" Brando stared at him. The silence stretched for 3 full seconds. Then he said simply, "No." Complete silence in the studio. Paul Schaefer glanced over from the keyboard, eyebrows raised. Letterman forced a short laugh. "Well, that's honest." "You asked," Brando said. "I did," Letterman admitted. "So why keep doing it?" "Money," Brando said without hesitation. "And because people expect me to. Because that's what Marlon Brando does. He acts, he shows up, he plays the part." The audience didn't know whether to laugh or stay quiet. A few uncomfortable chuckles. Letterman looked down at his desk, then back up. "That's pretty dark, Marlon." "It's true," Brando said. "Does that bother you?" "A little, yeah," Letterman said honestly. Brando almost smiled. "Good. At least you're being honest too." Letterman shifted again. The conversation was veering into territory he didn't control, and that made him uncomfortable. Okay, but you've made some of the greatest films ever made. The Godfather alone is a movie. Brando interrupted quietly. It's not real. None of it's real. Letterman stopped mid-sentence. The studio fell into a deeper quietness. Even the audience members, who had been shifting in their seats, went still. What do you mean? Letterman asked carefully. Brando leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on his knees. I mean, people think they know me because they've seen me play characters on a screen. They think they understand who I am because they watched me pretend to be a mob boss, or a dock worker, or a colonel in the jungle. But those aren't me. I don't even know who I am half the time. So how could they? Letterman opened his mouth, closed it, looked at Paul. Paul looked back with wide eyes. Letterman turned back to Brando. I don't know what to say to that. You don't have to say anything, Brando said. That's the problem with these shows. Everyone thinks they have to say something. Fill the silence. Make a joke. Keep it moving, even when there's nothing to say. Paul Schaefer played a soft, uncertain chord on the piano, a musical question mark. Letterman glanced at the audience. They were riveted. You could hear the hum of the studio lights. He looked back at Brando, and something in his expression had changed. The ironic distance was gone. Are you okay, Marlon? Brando smiled faintly. Are you? Letterman laughed a real, short, surprised laugh. Honestly, I don't know. Most of the time, I'm just trying to keep this thing moving. Make people laugh. Get to the next segment. I know, Brando said quietly. I can see it in your eyes. You're performing right now, even when you think you're being yourself. Letterman went very still. His hand, which had been holding a pencil, slowly set it down on the desk. Soon, something would happen that no one in the studio was prepared for. Brando leaned back in his chair and studied Letterman's face. Can I ask you something, David? Letterman nodded slowly. Sure. Why do you do this? The show? Yeah, this. Every night. The jokes, the guests, the whole thing. Why? Letterman thought about it longer than he usually would. I don't know. Because I'm good at it. Because it's what I do. Because it's my job. That's not an answer, Brando said gently. That's a deflection. Letterman's smile faded completely now. What do you want me to say? The truth, Brando said. If you know it. The studio was so quiet you could hear someone in the back row clear their throat. Letterman stared at Brando. Then he looked down at his desk. When he spoke, his voice was quieter. I do it because if I stop, I don't know what I'd be. I don't know who I am without this desk, without the camera, without the audience telling me I'm doing okay. Brando nodded slowly. There is! Letterman looked away. His jaw tightened. He picked up his coffee mug, then put it down without drinking. Can we talk about something else? Sure, Brando said, but neither of them spoke. The silence stretched. 5 seconds, 10, 15, 20. The audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Someone coughed. Paul Schaefer sat frozen at his keyboard, hands hovering over the keys but not playing. Then Marlon Brando stood up. Letterman's head snapped up, startled. What are you? I'm going to walk around, Brando said calmly. You're what? Brando stepped away from the guest chair and walked slowly toward the audience. Letterman stood up, confused and suddenly nervous. Marlon, we're still on the air. I know, Brando said. He stopped in front of the first row of the audience. The cameras scrambled to follow him. He looked down at a woman in her 50s, wearing a floral blouse, clutching her purse. What's your name? Brando asked gently. Linda, she said, her voice shaking. Hi, Linda. Do you like this show? Yes, she said. Why? She hesitated, glancing at Letterman, then back at Brando. Because it makes me laugh. It makes me feel less alone, I guess. Brando nodded thoughtfully. Good reason. He moved to the next person, a young man in his 20s with glasses. You? I watch it every night, the guy said nervously. Why? I don't know. It's comforting, I guess. Like everything's going to be okay for an hour. Brando smiled faintly. Comforting. He looked back at Letterman, who was still standing by his desk, completely frozen. What Brando said next would stop everyone in the studio cold. You know what's funny? Brando said, still facing the audience. We all pretend. Every single one of us. We pretend we're fine. Pretend we know what we're doing. Pretend we're not terrified of being found out, of being alone, of not mattering. He turned slowly back toward the stage. You pretend every night, David. You put on the suit, you smile, you make the jokes, and you pretend that this, he gestured around the studio, means something. And we, he gestured to the audience, we pretend right along with you, because it's easier than admitting we're all just lost. Letterman's face had gone pale. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. His hands gripped the edge of his desk. Paul Schaefer sat completely motionless at the keyboard, staring. Brando walked slowly back toward the stage. He didn't sit back down in the guest chair. Instead, he stood beside Letterman's desk, close enough that Letterman had to look up at him. "I've spent my whole life pretending," Brando said quietly, but the microphones caught every word. "Pretending to be other people, pretending to care about awards, and premieres, and interviews like this one. Pretending I wasn't angry at the world. Pretending I wasn't scared of being forgotten. Pretending I knew what any of it meant." His voice stayed calm, but there was something breaking underneath it. "And you know what it got me?" Letterman didn't answer. He couldn't. "Nothing," Brando said. "Absolutely nothing that matters. I've got money. I've got fame. I've got 2 little gold statues in a drawer somewhere. But I don't have peace. I don't have clarity. I don't even have honesty most of the time." He turned and looked directly into the camera. The red light glowed. Somewhere in America, millions of people were watching this unfold in real time. "If you're watching this at home right now," Brando said, his voice steady and clear, "and you're pretending too, pretending you're happy, pretending you're not scared, pretending you're not lonely, just know you're not alone. We're all doing it. Every single one of us. Me, him." He gestured to Letterman. "Everyone in this room. We're all just trying to get through the day without falling apart." He paused. The silence was enormous. "Maybe that's okay," Brando said. "Maybe that's all we can do. But at least we can stop pretending we're not pretending." He looked back at Letterman one more time. Letterman's eyes were red, glistening under the lights. "Thank you for having me, David," Brando said quietly. And then Marlon Brando turned and walked off the stage. No wave, no bow, no showbiz goodbye. Just gone. The audience didn't know what to do. A few people started to clap, then stopped. Most just sat in stunned silence. Letterman stood there for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 10 seconds. Then he slowly sat back down. He looked at the camera. His hands were shaking slightly. Paul Schaefer played a single, quiet note on the piano. Then silence again. We'll be right back," Letterman said, his voice cracking on the last word. The show cut to commercial. Backstage, producers rushed to find Brando. They found him sitting alone in his dressing room, still wearing the turtleneck, staring at the wall. "Mr. Brando, are you all right?" one of them asked, breathless. He didn't answer right away. Then, without looking at them, "I'm fine. Do you want to come back out? We can reshoot the segment. We can." "No," Brando said firmly. "It's done. Leave it." The producer hesitated. "The network might have an issue with." "I don't care," Brando said. He finally looked up at them. "For once in my life, I said something true on television. Don't take that away." They didn't push him further. When the show came back from commercial, Letterman was alone at his desk. He didn't bring out another guest. He didn't do a comedy bit. He didn't make a joke. He just looked into the camera and said, "That was Marlon Brando. I don't know what just happened, but I think it mattered. I think maybe it was the most honest thing that's ever happened on this show." He paused, gathering himself. "We'll see you tomorrow night." The credits rolled over a shot of Letterman sitting at his desk in silence. No music, just the hum of the studio. The next morning, NBC received over 3,000 phone calls. Some people were angry. They said Brando had ruined the show, that it was uncomfortable, that they didn't tune in to feel depressed. But most of the calls were different. "Thank you for airing that. I needed to hear what he said. I've never felt more seen by a TV show." The network executives didn't know what to do with it. They held a meeting. Some wanted to bury the footage. Others wanted to rerun it and capitalize on the buzz. In the end, they did neither. The episode aired once and was never rerun. It remained in the NBC archives, unreleased and unexplained. Years later, in 1997, a journalist asked Letterman about that night. "Did Brando ever explain what he was doing?" Letterman shook his head. "No. And I never asked him. We exchanged a few letters, but we never talked about this show." "Why not?" "Because I think he already said everything he needed to say, and I wasn't ready to hear it then. I'm not sure I am now. Do you regret it?" "No," Letterman said softly. "It's the only time I've ever felt completely honest on television, and I barely said anything. He did all the work. Should the footage be released?" Letterman smiled faintly. "Some things are meant to stay in the moment. Once you package it, sell it, turn it into content, you kill what made it real." The footage still exists, but it's never been digitized or uploaded. People who were there, crew members, audience, Paul Schaefer, mention it occasionally. A stagehand once said, "It was the most honest thing I've ever seen on TV, and the most uncomfortable. I didn't know whether to cry or leave." Paul Schaefer later said, "Brando broke the format. He reminded us there are real people behind the performance." Brando never returned to Letterman. He never returned to talk shows at all. By the late 80s, he had mostly vanished from public life, retreating to Tahiti, spending time with family, avoiding Hollywood. Shortly before his death in 2004, a reporter asked him about that night. "Do you regret walking off Letterman's show?" After a long pause, Brando said, "That's the only thing I don't regret." "Why?" "Because for 2 minutes, I stopped acting." In Letterman's home office hangs a framed handwritten note Brando left in his dressing room that night. Letterman has never shown it publicly. It reads, "Thank you for letting me stop pretending, even if it made everyone uncomfortable. That's the only time TV has ever felt real to me. MB." Letterman has never thrown it away. And on nights when the performance feels hollow, when the jokes don't land, he looks at that note and remembers the night Marlon Brando walked off his show and told the truth.